Item 10B, thank you, Jimmy. Item 10B, receive, report, and provide direction regarding ordinance regulating exposure to secondhand smoke.
Good evening again, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. This item is on for discussion and direction regarding an ordinance regulating secondhand smoke. So when we last met to discuss this with the full City Council, the City Council had heard from some residents who came to a meeting and asked that the city consider an ordinance to prohibit smoking in multi-unit residences. So the City Council appointed a subcommittee, and that consisted of Vice Mayor Marty Medina and Council Member Ken Ibarra, to meet with various groups in the community, obtain some input, and then return with a report and a possible draft ordinance. So I'm sure the City Council is going to want to hear directly from the subcommittee with more details right after my brief report, but let me just make a couple of quick comments. So the subcommittee did have two meetings, public meetings, one at Shelter Creek, the other one right here at the Senior Center. Representatives of the major apartment and condo complexes were in attendance, along with residents of the community, representatives of San Mateo County. So we then met with the subcommittee to discuss some of the outcomes of those meetings and outline an ordinance, which you have in your packet for review and discussion. So let me just quickly summarize the key features of the ordinance. So let's start with where smoking would be prohibited. And by the way, smoking in the ordinance is currently defined as including vaping as well as smoking marijuana. So smoking would be prohibited in individual units of multi-unit residences. So that's 2 or more units, or in common areas except those designated for smoking. It would also be prohibited in public places, so places like parks and playgrounds, farmers markets, fairs and parades, and also in service areas, so for example, ATM lines and bus stops. And finally, it would be prohibited in places of employment. Now, state law already covers some of the indoor workplaces, but this would broaden coverage to workplace areas, like in City Hall, for example, plus outdoor workplaces as well. So that's how it's currently written, but that's subject to your discretion to review and provide direction on. So those are, in broad form, the 3 places where smoking would be prohibited: multi-unit residences, public places, and primarily outdoor places of employment. So where would smoking be allowed? Smoking would still be allowed in single-family homes, detached second units, or if there's no common wall, floor, or ceiling between the units. Would also be allowed in designated outdoor areas if it's 20 feet from an operable door or window, and that's the same standard as in state law. It would also be allowed in tobacco retail shops, so if you only sell tobacco products, you can smoke in there as long as there aren't minors present. The ordinance proposes that smoking would be prohibited in up to 10% of hotel and motel rooms. Most hotels and motels prohibit smoking nowadays, but that's also to your discretion. And then finally, smoking would still be allowed on streets and sidewalks, as long as the street or sidewalk isn't used as a workplace, so for example, an outdoor dining area, or if it's a city-sponsored event, and the person has to be actively passing from one location to another. So the idea here is to prohibit smoking in those areas where people shouldn't be expected to leave. That's the bottom line. So a couple of other questions. How would this ordinance be implemented? So for the ban on multi-unit residences, the ordinance would provide a grace period of up to 14 months. And what that does is, if you have a lease that's a year-long lease, this ordinance would provide an additional 2 months after that, so that individuals who determined, for whatever reason, that they either didn't want to comply with the ban or couldn't comply with the ban, then are not having to break a lease in order to comply with the ordinance. So that allows a change for the lease terms, a change in occupancies, and the change in circumstances. Otherwise, the staff would propose some education and outreach in the meantime, including to businesses that might be affected. So there's been some suggestions about developing a trifold flyer that could be available at City Hall, passed out to residents as well as businesses, out to the Chamber of Commerce, for example. We could do a cable spot on the TV channel, and also continue meeting with interested groups to identify appropriate outdoor smoking areas. So one of the things that we've noticed in our experience is that if there are appropriate outdoor smoking areas where people can go and smoke, then the compliance with the ordinance is much higher. Last question many people have is how would the ordinance actually be enforced? And it would be proposed to be a complaint-driven enforcement, so the staff isn't going to go out and look for people who are smoking. It would be complaint-driven. There's no question that it would ultimately consume some staff code enforcement resources, especially at first, so that's something that we need to more fully evaluate. The county can certainly help us by being a first point of contact, perhaps, and so we need to work with them to identify what they can do for the city before the ordinance goes into effect and then afterward. The good news is that if the city council ultimately agrees with some sort of grace period, you'll also have that time to plan and do outreach, and so hopefully you won't have a big impact in terms of code enforcement, but there will be some, and that's certainly something we'd want to explore and evaluate. The main topics for your discussion tonight are listed at the end of my staff report. There are really just about half a dozen issues that I think the subcommittee was interested in throwing out for you and for your further consideration. One of them is the definition of what's a multi-unit residence. Do you want to start with duplexes or start at some level beyond that? Definition of multi-unit residence common areas. So, for example, if the entity has a pool, for example, you wouldn't be able to smoke around the pool. Definition of places of employment to include both some indoor and outdoor areas, as I've discussed. Service areas, so that's the other issue. Do you want to prohibit smoking ATM lines, bus stops, those sorts of things? Do you want to include vaping and smoking marijuana in that? That's something that's to your discretion. And then finally, the question of what should the appropriate grace period be for implementing the regulations in residences. So that concludes my report. We're only looking for some discussion and direction tonight to work on the ordinance. I did provide you with a draft ordinance. In the packet, it does have some comments in the bubbles you can see on the side. It says this is why this is here and that's why that's there. So we're open to suggestions. If you have any questions, we'll take them down and then come back at an upcoming meeting, either with some more discussion and direction or an ordinance for introduction. That concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, any questions for Mark? How about some comments from the subcommittee? Ken?
I just want to say that I'm in favor with how the city attorney has laid out the guidelines and the ordinance. I think what the message needs to get out there is that times have changed, and that as a former smoker, I could appreciate how people did not like smokers, and so I accepted the fact that I would be in a designated area. To top that, to add that, I had a household where I had a child that had a health issue, so I never smoked indoors. And so I think the message and the awareness for these multifamily residents need to realize that, yes, there are people that have health issues, and that it is more and more becoming unacceptable to be impacted by your secondhand smoke. And I think as a former smoker, I accepted the fact that there was an area for smokers. And as long as these facilities can provide an adequate outdoor area for smokers, I think people will reach some satisfaction. I believe there's going to be some challenges because there are going to be some smokers, as there always are, and with non-smokers, that it's not enough. And so hopefully we can interject along with the county and also the management at these facilities to referee, and hopefully engage these parties and get them to cooperate. And I think that's the thing. We all want to live together, and hopefully they will cooperate. But I think it's an ordinance that's time has come.
Marty?
Yeah, I would echo Councilman Ibarra's comments. When you hear the stories of the the people that are having these health issues and the impact that the next door neighbor's smoke is doing to them. It's gut-wrenching, and we have to do something about it. And it is time. I believe that there was one person who spoke out in the 2 meetings that we had about of not controlling the smoking, and that was mainly of the right to enjoy your own, basically you're the king of your own castle, pretty much. But that castle has holes in it, and the smoke from your castle goes into your neighbor's castle. And if there's somebody there that has some health concerns, then if you're not going to do it yourself and control it, then I believe it's our job to step in for you. So I appreciate our city attorney's expertise, since he did start the first smoking ban in the city of Belmont. So we have the experience there, and I'm looking forward to hearing how we want to get the details on his 6 recommended options.
Anyone else? Rico?
I guess you kind of, to the city attorney, answered the question, which was how do you enforce it? Well, it's really not. It's a mechanism and a tool that can be utilized on complaint-driven, i.e. same if there was drinking in city parks. There's a tool available if it needs to be utilized. I guess one of my thoughts were too, we're talking about San Mateo Avenue, and we're talking about the way you described it. You're walking down the street, you can smoke because you're going from point A to point B. You couldn't be standing outside the establishment because you can't smoke inside to go outside and put hopefully the butt in the appropriate receptacle, not on the ground, and that would then be prohibited going forward based on this. So I guess what it is I think we need to have some good education and outreach. Explanation, I think, is fair. I mean, the Councilmember Iberia, you were a smoker, so you've seen on both sides of it. I know the homeowners associations and the condominiums and stuff already have that right and that ability to take these type of actions and even go further than us here. I think they're reluctant, or they've chosen not to. So it seems, unfortunately, that some of it comes to us when they have their own elected bodies to make those decisions for the collective who pay association dues. That's the only thing that I wish, if there was that much concern from those organizations, that they would have also stepped forward with some solutions. So I think we need to do something. I'm kind of interested on some of the detailed language, though, on how we define things, and I think that's going to be important for easy understanding, as well as not overreaching.
Irene, anything?
No, I'll wait for the discussion of each item.
There may be some members of the public who wish to comment.
Yeah. Would anyone from the public like to make a comment? Sure. I will.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and honorable city council members. My name is Karen Licavoli, and I've been working with the San Mateo County Tobacco Education Coalition for almost 18 years. So I will address your 6 points, but first, excuse me, I really want to commend the city attorney, Mark Zavarano, for his extensive, thorough, and comprehensive work on this issue. You did mention he has a history, which we also have a history in Belmont, and I just really appreciate the efforts that the staff put into it, but also the efforts you put into getting public comments through your process. I just want to address just some random things. One is you've touched upon it, but it's really important that we look at design over ownership. I think that's just an important buzzword to remember, and I think that you said it, council member, the most beautifully I've ever heard anyone say it about home being a castle and what that means to people and how everyone is entitled to have a healthy castle. So one of the things I also want, so that's a random statement. The other thing I want to talk about is HOAs. HOAs, it's a very cumbersome process for them to get. They have to get 50+% of their membership to vote on something. So it's not 50% of those who show up, it's 50% of the entire membership. So it's really hard to corral all those members, and I think that's what makes it most difficult. And most HOAs throughout the cities that have already adopted the policy, which are listed in here, have turned to their city councils or their board of supervisors to help them with that process. As I mentioned, I've been working with the Tobacco Education Coalition for 18 years, so I've been working on a lot of different policies, and some of them are addressed in the staff report, and I just want to touch upon what's been happening historically around these issues. So across the board, for all intents and purposes, multi-unit housing definition has been narrowed to just sharing a floor and a ceiling and wall and sidewalls. I was at that study session. We talked a lot about renters and in-law units, but right now that's the standard. So obviously it's up to you to take that another step further. I want to talk a little bit about outdoor spaces. Just so you know, most of other cities in San Mateo County have bus stops, service areas, like ATM lines. Those have been covered for some time now. So it'd be great if San Bruno would also join in that, so that the more standard we have these particular laws throughout our county, the more citizens know how to basically operate from town to town, from city to city. The other thing I want to just mention is about the definition of smoking to include vaping and smoking marijuana. There's also part of the definition in there that I just want to throw out to you, Mark, is that there's a part in there about nicotine being specifically used in these devices, and you list the different types of devices, but I just want to remind you that what people smoke in these devices and e-cigarettes is not regulated by the FDA, and many of these products will say they're nicotine-free, so that would be a loophole in this particular ordinance, but there's absolutely no proof that that's nicotine-free, because there's absolutely no regulations that requires these products to have any kind of ingredient labels on it like they do with most other products that are sold to consumers. So you may just want to say that we actually, you know what, we have definitions for you. We can just plop in there. I also want to just commend, I think the 14-month grace period is very generous and very appropriate. It allows you to work on the education process, and also allows the residents to get accustomed to the idea and or make changes in their lifestyle or their residence if they have to. So I think that's a very generous step. And then as far as enforcement, as I mentioned, there's five plus other entities that have adopted a similar type of policy. Enforcement has not really been an issue, and we've tried to talk about this before. It is self-enforcing, but we do not have massive amount of police efforts going to homes. Really, it's been, and Shonda will talk about what the county's done. The county's been the first line of education and being the hammer, and people pretty much comply with those types of official letters. So, and I do agree with Councilmember Ibarra too, is that smokers, many of them are concerned about other people. Many of them, actually more than the majority of them, want to quit. So anything that they can do anything they can do to comply with the existing laws, protect their friends and family, because they know that it's an issue, and we know what a hard habit it is to break. So I think that's what makes the self-enforcement piece something that's been very effective in this process. So at that, I will turn it over to Shonda.
Thank you. Mayor and fellow City Council members, I'm Shonda Scruggs, Director of Tobacco Prevention for San Mateo County Health System. I just wanted to touch on a couple of things. I provided an updated copy of the matrix listing all the policies throughout the county that was provided to you, as well as an infographic that the state put out updating the state's indoor air quality laws related to tobacco use indoor spaces. These became effective on June the 9th when the governor signed them into law, so that news it's very new. And just to piggyback on Karen's comment about enforcement, the county does serve as the first line for the cities. We encourage the residents to file complaints through our office, and we send letters, and sometimes we have some of our contractors go up to provide some one-on-one education to the individual tenants, and in most cases, that's where it ends. The individuals generally adjust their behavior, say, oh, I wasn't aware that my neighbor had complained, and so I'll go outside, or actually I wanted to quit. So we haven't had to involve law enforcement to any substantial level in any of the cities that we've worked with over the years. And so we've had a very high rate of compliance in all of the policies that have passed related to smoke-free multi-unit housing and outdoor spaces. San Mateo County has the second lowest smoking rate in the entire state. Therefore, the self-enforcing nature of it just really kind of perpetuates. I mean, sometimes we get calls in our office that say, well, I didn't know people could still smoke in San Mateo, because it's so uncommon to see people smoking in a number of public places, because many cities have implemented policies like this. So I just wanted to provide that information, offer my assistance. The city clerk does have my contact information, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. I agree with all the discussion. I think the sooner the better, and implementation followed by education, side by side. I think it's going to be very important going forward. So this is a long time in coming, and I think it's very important. Anything, Irene?
You all said it so well. There's nothing else I can say.
Do you need anything else, Mark?
I think we're set. We'll bring back an ordinance that's consistent with all the comments. I'd like to thank the representatives of the Tobacco Education Coalition in the county for pointing out the nicotine issue. I had actually flagged that in a later review of the ordinance and thought, oh, rats, I missed that. So thank you very much for pointing that out. So we'll bring it back. We'll update some of the findings, which we didn't spend time doing before this, and then bring it back at an upcoming meeting.
Good. Thank you very much for all your hard
Thank you.
work, as well as the subcommittee. It was a lot of time spent, but very well spent. Thank you very much.